You know what it's like to watch everything you've ever worked for just disappear into the wind? Not metaphorically. I mean literally picked up and carried away by a wall of dirt so thick you can't see your own hand in front of your face. I'm talking about choking on dust in your own home, covering your children's faces with wet rags just so they can breathe, watching your fields turn to powder and blow away to Kansas while you stand there, completely helpless. That was my life during the Dust Bowl, and today I'm going to tell you exactly what it was like to live through America's worst environmental disaster. The thing they don't teach you in history class. The raw, unfiltered truth of what happened when the sky turned black and the rain just stopped coming. This isn't just history, folks. This is a warning. So stick around, because what I'm about to share with you, it's going to change the way you see everything. The land beneath your feet, the food on your table, the very air you breathe. Let's go back to 1931. Back to when I thought I had everything figured out. Picture this. It's 1926, and I'm 23 years old with dirt under my fingernails and dreams bigger than the Oklahoma sky. My father's standing next to me on our newly purchased 160 acres, and he's got this look in his eyes I've never seen before. Pride. Pure, unfiltered pride. "Son," he says, "this land is going to make us rich." And you know what? For a few years there, it actually looked like he might be right. The Great Plow-Up, they called it. Millions of acres of native grassland getting turned over for wheat farming. And why not? Wheat prices were through the roof. World War I had ended, but Europe was still buying American grain by the shipload. Money was flowing like water. My first harvest in 1927, I made more money in 3 months than my father had made in 2 years of farming back in Missouri. I bought my wife Sarah a new dress from the catalog. Not because she needed it, just because I could. I remember the day it arrived. She held that dress up to the light coming through our kitchen window, and the blue fabric seemed to shimmer. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "We're really going to make it, aren't we?" "Darling," I told her, "we already have." God, I was so sure of myself. Every farmer around us was thinking the same thing. We'd wake up before dawn, work until our backs screamed for mercy, and fall into bed exhausted but satisfied. This was the American dream, right here in our calloused hands. My neighbor, Tom Henderson, bought a brand new tractor. A real beauty, fresh off the factory line. Cost him nearly $1,000, but he didn't bat an eye. "The old ways are done, John," he told me one evening as we watched the sunset paint the wheat fields gold. "This is the future. Mechanization, efficiency. More acres, more wheat, more money." He wasn't wrong about the efficiency part. With those new tractors, we could plow deeper and faster than ever before. We were turning over soil that hadn't been touched in 10,000 years. Prairie grass that had held that earth together through droughts and storms since the last ice age. We just ripped it right out. Didn't think twice about it. Why would we? The rain kept coming, the wheat kept growing, the money kept flowing. In 1929, I expanded our operation to 240 acres, took out a loan from the bank at what seemed like reasonable terms. Everyone was doing it. Leverage, they called it, using borrowed money to make more money. The banker practically pushed the papers across his desk at me. "You're a smart man, John," he said. "A hard worker. This land will pay for itself 3 times over before the loan comes due." I signed without hesitation. That fall, I harvested the biggest crop of my life. Sarah and I took the children into town, and I bought them each a peppermint stick. 5 cents apiece. It might not sound like much to you, but to see my kids' faces light up like that was wealth. Real wealth. I remember standing in our field after that harvest, ankle-deep in wheat stubble, looking out at the horizon. The sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at. The air smelled like dust and diesel and possibility. "Thank you," I whispered to nobody in particular. To God, maybe. To the land. To whatever force in the universe had blessed me with this opportunity. I should have been thanking the rain, because in about 2 years it was going to stop. And when it did, everything I just thanked the universe for was going to be taken away, piece by piece, day by day, until there was almost nothing left. You want to know the truth about disasters? They don't usually announce themselves with trumpets and thunder. They creep up on you, quiet, subtle, until one day you wake up and realize you're already in the middle of hell. That's how the Dust Bowl started for us. Winter of 1930 to 1931 was dry, but dry winters weren't unheard of. We'd had them before. The rain will come in spring, everyone said. It always does. Spring came. No rain. Summer then, Tom Henderson said, squinting at the cloudless sky. We'll get thunderstorms in summer. Mark my words. We marked his words. We waited. We watched those fields of wheat start to look thin, patchy. The stalks weren't standing tall and proud like they should have been. They were struggling, reaching up toward that merciless blue sky like they were begging for water. I'd go out in the mornings and dig down into the soil with my hands. 6 inches down, the earth was already dry as powder. A foot down, barely any moisture. 2 feet down, nothing. The aquifer was dropping. The underground water that had sustained this land through countless cycles of drought and plenty. We'd pumped so much of it up for irrigation that it was just disappearing. But we kept planting. What else were we going to do? I had a loan to pay. Tom had his new tractor to pay for. Every farmer for 100 miles around had expenses, had families, had debts. You don't just stop farming because it's dry. You push through. You work harder. You pray harder. Sarah started keeping a rain gauge by the kitchen window. Every morning she'd check it with this hopeful look on her face. And every morning I'd watch that hope fade just a little bit more. Maybe today, she'd say. Maybe today, I'd agree. But today never came. By June of 1931, my wheat crop was dying in the field. Not all of it. Maybe 30% would still be harvestable. But that meant 70% of my investment, 70% of my hopes, 70% of my loan payment was just withering away under that burning sun. I remember the day I finally admitted it to myself. I was standing in the middle of my field, holding a wheat stalk in my hand. The grain at the top was shriveled, barely formed. I crushed it between my fingers, and it turned to dust. Literally. To dust. That's when I felt it for the first time. This cold knot in my stomach, this whisper in the back of my mind that said, this isn't just a bad year, this is something else. Something worse. I looked around at my neighbors' fields. Same story. Dying wheat, cracking earth, dust starting to gather in little drifts at the edges of the furrows. The wind was picking up. It was always windy in Oklahoma. That was nothing new. But this wind felt different somehow. Angrier, hungrier, like it was looking for something to take. And man, was it about to find it. That summer, we harvested what we could. I made maybe 30 cents on the dollar of what I'd expected. The banknote came due. I paid what I could and got an extension on the rest. Next year, the banker said, but his eyes didn't have that same confidence anymore. Next year, I agreed. We needed next year to be better. Instead, next year was when everything went to hell. April 14th, 1935. If you know anything about the Dust Bowl, you probably know that date. Black Sunday, the day the worst dust storm in American history rolled across the Great Plains. But let me tell you what it was actually like to live through it. That morning started beautiful. And I mean beautiful. The sun was shining, the temperature was mild. There was even a hint of moisture in the air for the first time in weeks. Sarah had opened all the windows in the house. We were airing the place out, trying to get rid of the perpetual smell of dust that had worked its way into every piece of fabric, every crack in the walls. The kids were playing outside. I could hear them laughing. Do you know how precious that sound was after 3.5 years of drought and desperation? To hear your children laugh. I was in the barn, trying to repair a broken harness, when I heard it. This rumble. Low and deep, like distant thunder, but it didn't fade away like thunder does. It kept getting louder and louder. I stepped outside and looked north. The entire horizon was black. Not dark gray, not storm cloud gray, black. A wall of roiling darkness that stretched from the ground to thousands of feet in the air, racing toward us at maybe 60 miles per hour. "Sarah!" I screamed. "Get the kids inside, now!" I've never run so fast in my life. I was sprinting toward the house, and I could see Sarah on the porch, frozen, staring at this impossible thing bearing down on us. She had our youngest, Emma, who was only 3, in her arms. "The children!" I yelled. "Where are James and Mary?" She snapped out of it then, in the yard, behind the house. The wall of dust was maybe 2 miles away, maybe less. It was moving so fast, and it was blocking out the sun as it came. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 30 seconds. Birds were flying ahead of it, fleeing in terror. I found James and Mary by the chicken coop. They were staring at the storm with wide, terrified eyes. "Inside!" I grabbed them both by the arms and practically dragged them toward the house. "Move. Now." We made it through the door with maybe 60 seconds to spare. Sarah was already stuffing wet rags into the cracks around the windows. I grabbed towels, sheets, anything I could find, and shoved them against the bottom of the doors. "The windows!" Sarah shouted. "Close them!" But it was already too late. The storm hit like a freight train. 1 second, there was light. The next second, complete darkness. Total, absolute darkness, like someone had thrown a blanket over the entire world. The house shook. The windows rattled so hard I thought they'd shatter. The roar was deafening, a constant howling scream of wind and dust and fury. And then the dust started coming in. Despite our desperate efforts to seal every crack, it found its way inside. Through the windows, under the doors, through the walls themselves. Fine, suffocating powder that hung in the air like fog. Emma started coughing, then Mary, then all of us. "Wet rags," I shouted. "Cover your faces." Sarah was already ahead of me. She'd soaked dish towels in water and was tying them around the kids' faces. We looked like bandits, but we could breathe. Barely. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I literally tried. Held my hand up 6 inches from my nose and saw nothing. Nothing. We huddled together in the middle of the kitchen, the 5 of us, holding on to each other like we might blow away if we let go. Emma was crying. "Daddy, I'm scared." "I know, baby. I know. It's going to be okay." I was lying. I had no idea if it was going to be okay. For all I knew, this was the end of the world. The storm lasted 3 hours. 3 hours. Of complete darkness, of choking on dust despite the wet rags, of not knowing if the house was going to collapse on top of us, of praying to a God who I was starting to think had abandoned this place. When it finally passed, when the light started to filter back through the dust-caked windows, we looked around at our home. Everything was covered in a layer of dust an inch thick. The floor, the table, the stove, our bed, the children's toys, everything. It had drifted through the cracks like sand, piling up in little dunes against the walls. I opened the door, and the sight that greeted me, our world had been transformed, buried. The fence posts were halfway covered. The barn door was blocked by a drift of dust 3 feet high. The car was completely buried on one side, with dust piled up to the windows. And everywhere you looked, for as far as you could see, everything was coated in this fine brown-gray powder. The trees, the buildings, the ground, everything was the same color, the same texture. It looked like the surface of another planet. Tom Henderson came walking up the road about an hour later. His face was gray with dust. His eyes were red and watery. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. "You folks make it through okay?" he asked. I nodded. "You?" "Lost 30 chickens. Suffocated in their coop. The dust was so thick they couldn't breathe." We stood there in silence for a minute, just looking at the devastation. "This can't keep happening," I finally said. "This can't be normal." Tom shook his head. "It ain't normal. Nothing about this is normal." He was right. But it kept happening anyway. Black Sunday wasn't the end. It was just the worst one. There were dozens of other dust storms that year, hundreds over the course of the Dust Bowl years, and each one took a little more from us. A little more soil, a little more hope, a little more of our will to keep fighting. Here's what they don't tell you in history books about the Dust Bowl. It wasn't just the big storms. Those were terrifying, sure, but they were over in a few hours. It was the every single day grind of living in that dust that broke people. Let me paint you a picture of a typical day in our house during the worst years, 1934 to 1936. You wake up in the morning, and the first thing you do is cough. Because while you were sleeping, that fine dust settled into your lungs. You cough it up. It's brown. Sometimes it's got flecks of blood in it. Sarah and I both had what they called dust pneumonia, a constant inflammation of the lungs from breathing in that silica-laden dirt. It hurt to take deep breaths. Your chest always felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. We weren't alone. Half the people in town had it. The doctors couldn't do anything about it except tell you to wear a mask, and even that didn't help much. You get out of bed and you have to shake the dust off your blankets, even though you'd hung wet sheets over the bedroom door before going to sleep. Even though you'd stuffed rags in every crack, the dust still got in. You walk to the kitchen, and you have to wipe down the table before you can set anything on it. You have to wipe down the stove. You open the cupboard to get a plate, and you have to rinse the dust off it before you can use it, every single day. Sarah spent hours every day just trying to keep the house minimally clean, sweeping, wiping, washing. And 5 minutes after she finished, it would all be dusty again. It drove her to tears more than once. "What's the point?" she said one day, throwing down her dust rag in frustration. "What's the goddamn point of cleaning when it just comes right back?" I didn't have an answer for her. Meals were their own special nightmare. You couldn't leave food uncovered for even a minute or it would be coated in dust. We ate a lot of soup and stew because you could keep it covered on the stove. Anything else would be gritty by the time you got it to your mouth. Ever tried eating gritty bread? Gritty potatoes? Gritty eggs? It's disgusting. But you eat it anyway because you're hungry and there's no other option. The kids suffered the most. They couldn't play outside without choking on dust. They couldn't open the windows in summer, even though it was 100 degrees inside the house. Emma developed a chronic cough that lasted for 2 years. 2 years of listening to your 3-year-old daughter cough herself awake in the middle of the night. You want to talk about helplessness? That's helplessness. We tried everything. We hung wet sheets over the windows to catch the dust. We stuffed newspaper in the cracks. We wore masks made from old flour sacks. We kept buckets of water in every room so we could soak rags to breathe through when the dust got bad. Nothing really worked. And then there was the farm itself. What farm, you might ask? Exactly. By 1934, I wasn't farming anymore. I was just existing, trying to hold on to the land we owned, even though the land was literally blowing away beneath our feet. I'd go out in the morning and look at my fields. The topsoil that had taken thousands of years to form was just gone, stripped away by the wind. What was left was hardpan, infertile clay that nothing would grow in even if we had rain. And we didn't have rain. Months would go by without a drop. The sun would beat down on that exposed earth, baking it harder and harder. Then the wind would come and blow away another layer. Then the sun would bake it again. Then the wind would blow again, over and over, relentlessly. I tried planting in the spring of 1934. Got maybe 10% germination. The few plants that did sprout were dead within a month. I didn't bother planting in 1935. Neither did most of my neighbors. What was the point? You couldn't grow anything. You couldn't sell anything. You couldn't pay your debts. You couldn't leave because nobody wanted to buy worthless land. We were trapped. Tom Henderson lost his farm to the bank in January of 1935. Walked away from 320 acres that his father had homesteaded, that he'd poured 20 years of work into, that he'd gone into debt to expand and improve. Just walked away. I helped him load his family's belongings into their truck. Everything they owned in the world fit in the back of a pickup. A few pieces of furniture, some clothes, a box of photographs. His kids sat in the truck cab with these blank, traumatized looks on their faces. They'd never known anything but that farm, and now it was gone. "Where are you headed?" I asked Tom. "California," he said. "Heard there's work picking fruit out there. Might not be much, but it's more than her. You think you'll come back?" He looked at me with hollow eyes. "Come back to what, John? There's nothing here. The land is dead. The animals are dead. Hell, half the people are dead or dying." He wasn't exaggerating. People were dying, mostly the very young and the very old. Their lungs couldn't handle the constant dust. They'd develop pneumonia and just fade away. The cemetery on the edge of town had twice as many fresh graves as it should have. We went to 3 funerals in the spring of 1935 alone. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the general store, dead at 62. Little Bobby Morrison, who was 7 years old. 7. Dead from dust pneumonia. And Sam Martinez, who'd lived on his farm for 30 years and decided he couldn't take another day of watching everything die. He hung himself in his barn. Nobody blamed him. That's what the Dust Bowl did to people. It didn't just kill the land. It killed hope. It killed the future. It killed the very idea that things could get better. We had a saying, "In God we trusted, in Kansas we busted." Dark humor. But what else could you do? You either laughed or you cried, and we were all too dehydrated to cry. Now, I need to tell you something important about the Dust Bowl years. We weren't completely abandoned. The government did try to help. President Roosevelt's New Deal programs made their way even to our dusty corner of Oklahoma. But sometimes, help comes too late, and sometimes it comes in forms you can't use. The Civilian Conservation Corps showed up in 1934. Young men from the cities, put to work on conservation projects. They were supposed to plant trees, build terraces, help prevent erosion. Good idea in theory. But how do you plant trees when there's no water to keep them alive? How do you build terraces on land that's blowing away faster than you can shape it? They tried. God bless them, they tried. But most of those trees died within a year. The terraces filled with dust and disappeared. Then came the Soil Conservation Service. Government men in suits showing up at farms, clipboard in hand, telling us we'd been farming wrong all along. Contour plowing, they said. Crop rotation, windbreaks. You need to implement these practices immediately. I remember the meeting they held at the town hall. Must have been 50 farmers there. Tired, broke, desperate men who'd been working the land their entire lives. This government fellow stood up front with his charts and his diagrams, explaining how we destroyed the prairie grassland that held the soil together, how deep plowing had exposed the earth to erosion, how single crop farming had depleted the nutrients. He wasn't wrong. But try telling that to a man who'd lost everything, to a man whose children were coughing up dust, to a man who couldn't pay his mortgage and couldn't feed his family. Old Mr. Jacobson stood up in the back of the room. He was 75 years old and had been farming since he was 12. "Where were you people 10 years ago?" he shouted, "when the banks were pushing us to plant every acre? When the tractor salesmen were telling us to plow deeper and faster? When the government was encouraging us to produce more wheat for the war effort?" The government man opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have an answer. Now you show up, Jacobson continued, and tell us we did it all wrong. Now you want us to fix it. With what money? With what seed? With what water? He sat down. The room was silent. The government man cleared his throat. The federal government is offering loans for conservation equipment, low interest rates. We can help you. More debt, someone muttered. That's your solution. More debt. I didn't take the loan. I was already behind on the mortgage I had. The last thing I needed was another debt I couldn't pay. But some of my neighbors did take it. They were more optimistic than me, I guess, or more desperate. They used the money to buy new plows, to build windbreaks, to try new planting techniques. Most of them lost everything anyway. The government also started buying cattle, part of the Drought Relief Service program. They'd pay you for your livestock and then slaughter them because there was no feed to keep them alive. I had 12 head of cattle when the drought started. By 1935, I was down to 4, and those 4 were walking skeletons, ribs showing, hip bones jutting out. They'd stand by the fence and just stare at me, like they were asking why I wasn't feeding them, because I didn't have anything to feed them, that's why. The government man who came to inspect them looked at my cows and shook his head. These need to be put down, he said. They're suffering. How much? I asked. $16 a head. $16. For animals, I'd paid $50 each for when times were good. For animals I'd raised from calves. For animals that represented the last little bit of functioning farm I had left. But he was right. They were suffering. We loaded them onto the truck. The government man drove them to a field outside of town where they'd set up a slaughter operation. Mass graves, really. They shot the cattle and bulldozed them into trenches. Thousands of cattle, piled up and buried. I took my $64 and went home. Sarah was waiting on the porch. How much? She asked. 64. She nodded slowly. Did the math in her head. That'll buy us 3 months of food. Maybe 4 if we're careful. 3 months. That's what the last of our livestock was worth. 3 months of survival. The New Deal did help some people. The Works Progress Administration provided jobs. They built roads, post offices, schools. If you were willing to move to where the work was, you could make a wage. But most of us couldn't leave. We were tied to our land by debt, by family, by stubborn pride. We kept thinking the rain would come, that next year would be better. It became a kind of mantra. Next year will be better. 1933. Next year will be better. 1934. Next year will be better. 1935. Next year will be better. 1936. Next year will be better. Next year was never better. The government programs kept us alive. Barely. They kept us from starving outright. They gave us just enough hope to keep trying. But they couldn't make it rain. They couldn't bring back the topsoil that had blown away. They couldn't undo the damage we'd done. And ultimately, that's what we needed. Rain and topsoil, not loans and lectures. We needed a miracle. Route 66, the Mother Road, the main street of America. During the Dust Bowl years, it was the escape route, the highway of hope and desperation. And I watched thousands of people take it, heading west with everything they owned, strapped to broken-down cars and trucks. They called them Okies, even though they came from Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Arkansas, Nebraska, and all across the Great Plains. It became a slur, a term of contempt for the dusty, desperate people fleeing the ecological disaster. It started as a trickle in 1933 and 1934. A family here, a family there, people who'd lost their farms to the bank or just couldn't take it anymore. By 1935 and 1936, it was a flood. Our town had about 1,500 people in 1930. By 1937, maybe 500 were left. The school shut down. Not enough kids. The church held services every other week instead of every week. Not enough congregation to justify a full-time preacher. The general store carried maybe a third of what it used to. Not enough customers to justify keeping a full inventory. Main Street looked like a ghost town. Buildings boarded up, windows broken, dust drifting across the empty street. I'd drive into town for supplies, and the silence was oppressive. No kids playing, no farmers chatting outside the feed store, no dogs barking, just wind and dust and emptiness. The Morrison family left in March of 1936. They'd lost their youngest son to dust pneumonia the year before, and they just couldn't bear to stay in the place where he'd died. Mrs. Morrison came to say goodbye to Sarah. The two of them stood on our porch, holding hands and crying. They'd been friends for 15 years, had been pregnant together, had raised their children together, had survived together. Now they were being torn apart by dust and desperation. "Write to me," Sarah said. "Let me know you made it safely." "I will," Mrs. Morrison promised. We never heard from her again. Don't know if they made it to California or not. Don't know if they found work or ended up in one of those migrant camps you read about. Don't know if they're alive or dead. They just disappeared into the exodus. That was common. Families would leave and you'd never know what happened to them. The road west swallowed them up. Some made it, some didn't. We heard stories, terrible stories, about families running out of money halfway to California and having to turn back only to find their homes had been repossessed, about people dying on the side of the road and being buried in unmarked graves, about the migrant camps in California's Central Valley where thousands of refugees lived in tents and tar paper shacks, working for pennies a day picking crops, about the violence. The Okies weren't welcome in California. They were seen as invaders, job stealers, lowlifes. There were riots, beatings, camps set on fire. One of those Okies was Tom Henderson. Remember him? My neighbor with a fancy new tractor? He wrote me a letter in late 1936. I still have it, actually. Let me tell you what it said. "John, don't come to California. It's not what they promised. There's too many of us and not enough work. We're living in a tent city outside Bakersfield. 20 families sharing one water spout and 2 outhouses. They pay us 50 cents a day to pick peaches, and there's 100 men fighting for every job. My kids are hungry. My wife is sick. We haven't had a real meal in 2 weeks. I wake up every morning wishing we'd stayed in Oklahoma. At least there we had a roof over our heads. At least there we had dignity. I don't know what we're going to do, but I wanted to warn you. Don't believe the handbills they post around town. Don't believe the stories about milk and honey in California. It's a lie. It's all a lie." I read that letter to Sarah. We sat at our dusty kitchen table, looking at each other. "We're staying," I said. "We're staying," she agreed. Not because things were good in Oklahoma. They weren't. They were terrible. But at least we still had our land, our house, our pride. At least we weren't refugees in a hostile land, begging for work, living in tents. At least not yet. The government tried to discourage the exodus, published articles about how California was full, how there was no work, how people should stay put. Didn't matter. People kept leaving. Can you blame them? When your children are hungry, when your lungs are full of dust, when there's no future in the place you call home, you go somewhere else. Anywhere else. Even if anywhere else turns out to be just as bad. At least you tried. At least you didn't just sit there and watch everything die. I judged them at first. The people who left. Thought they were weak. Quitters. Thought they should have toughed it out like us. But as the years went on, as 1936 turned to 1937 and the drought continued, as the dust storms kept coming and the sun kept baking the earth, I started to wonder if they were the smart ones, if maybe we were the fools for staying. January 15th, 1937. I remember the exact date because it was Emma's 6th birthday, and I couldn't afford to buy my daughter a birthday present. Not didn't have money for a fancy present. I mean, I literally had $4.37 to my name. We needed that money for food, Every penny counted. Sarah made Emma a doll out of corn husks and scrap fabric. Did a beautiful job of it. Emma loved it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd failed. Failed as a father, failed as a husband, failed as a man. I'd spent 7 years fighting the drought, fighting the dust, fighting the bank, fighting reality itself. And I'd lost. The farm was gone. Oh, we still lived on the land, technically. Still had the house. But the bank owned it now. We were just tenants in our own home. I paid rent to work land I used to own. The fields lay barren. Nothing planted. Nothing growing. Just dead earth and dust. We were surviving on government relief, commodity food, canned beef that tasted like shoe leather, powdered milk, stale bread. It kept us alive, but just barely. Sarah had lost 30 pounds. The kids were thin, too thin. I'd catch her giving them her portions of food when she thought I wasn't looking. We'd sold everything of value. The tractor, the tools, Sarah's mother's jewelry, my father's pocket watch, anything that would bring in a few dollars. The house was nearly empty. Just a table, some chairs, our beds, the bare minimum. And still, it wasn't enough. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the front porch staring out at the darkness. The wind was blowing. It was always blowing. Carrying dust from somewhere else, depositing it here, taking our dust and carrying it somewhere else. An endless, pointless cycle. Sarah came out and sat beside me. Didn't say anything at first. Just sat there in the cold January air, wrapped in a thin shawl. "I can't do this anymore," I finally said. She turned to look at me. "Can't do what?" "This. Any of this. I can't keep watching our children suffer. I can't keep pretending there's hope. I can't keep fighting a battle that's already lost." "What are you saying?" I took a deep breath. "I'm saying maybe we should leave. Pack up the truck and head west like everyone else. At least in California there's work. At least there we'd have a chance." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she reached over and took my hand. "You know what happens to people like us in California," she said. "We become migrants, refugees. We live in camps. We pick crops for pennies. We get looked down on and spit on and treated like trash. At least our kids would have enough to eat. Maybe. Or maybe we'd end up like Tom Henderson's family. Starving in a tent city, wishing we'd stayed home." "This isn't home anymore," I said. "Home is where your family is safe and fed and has a future. This place doesn't have any of those things." She squeezed my hand tighter. "Do you remember what your father told you when he signed over the deed to this land?" I did remember. Of course I did. He said, "This land is your inheritance. Your grandfather homesteaded it, I improved it. Now you'll make it prosper. Don't ever let it go. No matter what happens, don't let it go." "And that's what I've been doing," I said, anger rising in my voice. "I've been holding on. For 7 goddamn years, I've been holding on. And you know what I've got to show for it? Dust, debt, dying children. When is it enough, Sarah? When do I get to say I tried and it didn't work?" My voice cracked on those last words. I was crying. I didn't even realize it until I felt the tears on my face. Sarah pulled me close. I buried my face in her shoulder and sobbed. 7 years of held-back tears, 7 years of stubborn pride and desperate hope and grinding despair. It all came out. I cried for the farm we'd lost, for the future that had been stolen, for my children's innocence and my father's legacy and every broken promise this land had made. I cried until there was nothing left. And when I was done, when I'd finally emptied myself of all that pain, Sarah pulled back and looked me in the eyes. "We're not leaving," she said. "Sarah, no, listen to me. We're not leaving because if we leave, they win." "Who? Who wins?" "All of them. The drought, the dust, the bank. The government men who told us we were farming wrong. All the people who said we couldn't make it. If we leave, we're admitting they were right. Maybe they were right." "Maybe," she admitted. "Or maybe we just haven't reached the end yet." Maybe there's still something left to fight for. What? What's left? She gestured around at the darkness, at the land that had betrayed us, at the house that barely sheltered us. This, right here. This is still ours. They can take the deed. They can take our money. They can take our crops, but they can't take the fact that we stayed, that we fought, that we didn't break. I am broken, I whispered. No, she said firmly. You're bent. There's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed. Bent things can straighten back out. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. But I was so tired, so beaten down, so empty of everything except pain. The rain will come, Sarah said. It has to. Droughts don't last forever. The rain will come, and when it does, we'll plant again. We'll grow again. We'll rebuild everything we lost. And if it doesn't, then we'll figure something else out. But we'll do it here, on our land, where we belong. I looked at her in the darkness. This woman who'd married me when times were good, who'd stayed with me through the worst times imaginable, who'd somehow maintained her strength when mine had crumbled. Okay, I finally said. Okay, we'll stay. She kissed me. That's my John. We sat there on that porch until dawn, holding each other, drawing strength from each other, and when the sun came up over the dusty horizon, painting the dead land in shades of brown and gray. I stood up. I was bent, but I wasn't broken. Not yet. I need to tell you about rain, not just any rain, the rain that saved us. It started on September 12th, 1939. 8 years. 8 years of drought. 8 years of watching the sky and praying for clouds. We'd gotten a little rain here and there in 1938. Enough to give us hope. Enough to plant a small crop, but not enough to really break the drought. Not enough to bring the land back. Summer of 1939 was brutal. Hot, dry. The dust storms were fewer, thank God, but the earth was still cracked and dead. I'd planted a few acres of wheat that spring on borrowed seed. Most of it died, but I had a small section, maybe 3 acres, that was struggling along. Stunted, patchy, but alive. It wasn't much, but it was more than we'd had in years. That morning started like 100 others, hot, clear, not a cloud in sight. I went out to check on my pathetic little wheat field. The stalks were yellow, stressed, desperately needing water. I knelt down and felt the soil. Dry, always dry. I was about to head back to the house when I felt it. A breeze. Not the hot, dust-laden wind we were used to. This was different. Cool, moist. I looked up at the sky. Clouds, coming from the west. Not the high, thin clouds that promised nothing. These were thick, gray, heavy, storm clouds. My heart started pounding. Don't get excited, I told myself. You've seen clouds before. They pass over. They never drop rain. But these clouds kept building, getting darker, getting lower. I walked back to the house in a daze. Sarah was in the kitchen working on mending one of James's shirts. Sarah, I said, come outside. She looked up, saw my face, and immediately stood. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Just come outside. We stood on the porch together, looking at the sky. The kids came out too, drawn by the change in atmosphere. The clouds were building into thunderheads now, massive towers of gray and black blocking out the sun. Thunder rumbled, distant but unmistakable. Emma grabbed my hand. Is it a dust storm, Daddy? No, baby, I said, my voice shaking. That's not dust. The wind picked up. Cool wind, clean wind, wind that smelled like rain. And then a drop hit my face. Just one, a single drop of water. I froze. Another drop hit my hand, then another on my shoulder. Sarah gasped. John! The rain started falling, slowly at first. Individual drops that you could count, then faster, more drops, heavier drops, and then it opened up. The sky just opened up and poured. I stood there, arms outstretched, face turned up to the heavens, as 8 years of prayer was finally answered. Rain. Beautiful, glorious, impossible rain. It was coming down so hard it stung. I didn't care. I was laughing, crying. I couldn't tell which. Sarah was spinning in circles, her arms out, her face tilted back, her mouth open to catch the drops. The kids were running around the yard, splashing in puddles that were forming, screaming with joy. I fell to my knees in the mud, actual mud, not dust, and I sobbed. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The rain fell for 3 hours straight. Not a gentle shower, a downpour, a deluge, like the sky was making up for 8 years of holding back. When it finally stopped, I walked out to my wheat field. The plants were still there, still standing, straighter than they'd been that morning. The leaves were already perking up, drinking in the moisture, and the soil was wet. Not just damp on top. I dug down with my hands. 6 inches, a foot, 2 feet, all wet. Water, real water, soaking into the earth, filling the cracks, bringing the land back to life. Over the next few weeks, it rained 6 more times. Not as heavy as that first storm, but steady, regular. The change was miraculous. Within a month, green was appearing everywhere. Not just my wheat field. Wild grass was sprouting. Weeds. Volunteer wheat from old dropped seeds. The earth was waking up. My 3 acres of wheat actually produced a crop that fall. Not a great crop. Maybe 20% of what a good year would have been. But after 8 years of nothing, it felt like winning the lottery. I took the wheat to the grain elevator in town. The man behind the counter weighed it and gave me a slip. $47.15. I stared at that slip of paper. $47. From my own wheat. Grown on my own land. For the first time in 8 years. I drove home and found Sarah in the kitchen. I laid the money on the table. We're going to make it, I said. She picked up the bills, counted them, and started crying. We're going to make it, she agreed. Now, I need to be honest with you. The rain coming back in 1939 didn't fix everything overnight. It wasn't like flipping a switch. The land was damaged. Badly damaged. The topsoil that had blown away wasn't coming back. The native prairie grasses that had held everything together for thousands of years were gone. But we could farm again. That's what mattered. The next few years were hard in a different way. Not the desperate, starving, losing everything hard of the Dust Bowl years, but the grinding, slow, rebuilding hard. I planted wheat in the spring of 1940. Got a decent crop. Not great, but decent. Used that money to pay off some debt. Bought a used plow. Fixed the fence. Baby steps. Sarah started a garden. Actual vegetables growing in the ground. The first time in nearly a decade. Tomatoes. Beans. Squash. She brought the first ripe tomato into the house and set it on the table like it was a crown jewel, which to us it was. We stood around that tomato, all 5 of us, just looking at it. Can we eat it? Mary asked. Not yet, Sarah said. I want to look at it a little longer. The kids thought she was crazy, but I understood. That tomato represented everything we'd fought for, everything we'd survived, everything we'd refused to give up. We sliced it up at dinner and shared it. Best tomato I've ever tasted in my life. The town started coming back too, not to what it was before. We'd lost too many people for that. But some of the families who'd left started trickling back. The Andersons came back from California in 1941. They looked older, harder. They'd been through hell out there, but they couldn't stay away. California wasn't home, Mr. Anderson told me. This is home, dust and all. The school reopened. The church went back to weekly services. The general store started carrying more inventory. There was a feeling of, not quite hope, not yet, but possibility. Like maybe, just maybe, we could build something out of the ruins. The government conservation programs that had seemed so pointless during the drought started making sense now that we had water. Contour plowing really did help prevent erosion. Crop rotation really did help maintain soil health. Windbreaks really did slow down the wind. We learned. All of us learned. We learned that the land wasn't infinite, that you couldn't just take and take without giving back, that nature had limits, and if you pushed past those limits, nature would push back harder. Expensive lessons, paid for in dust and death and desperation, but lessons we wouldn't forget. I never did get back to the level of prosperity I had in the late 1920s. The bank owned too much of the land. The debt was too deep, and honestly, I didn't want to go back to that kind of farming, the kind where you plowed every acre, planted every square foot, pushed for maximum production regardless of the cost. Instead, I farmed more carefully, more conservatively, rotated crops, left some land fallow, planted trees as windbreaks, made less money, but the land survived. And so did we. Here's the darkest irony of the whole Dust Bowl story. World War II saved us, the same war that caused so much death and suffering around the world. It pulled us out of the economic depression that had made the Dust Bowl so devastating. Starting in 1942, the government needed wheat again. Needed it desperately to feed the troops, feed our allies, feed the war effort, and they paid top dollar for it. Suddenly, the wheat I was growing was worth something again, more than something. It was valuable, essential, patriotic. The younger men in town, including my son James, who turned 18 in 1943, went off to war. They traded the dust of Oklahoma for the mud of Europe or the jungles of the Pacific. James joined the army, fought in France, got a medal for bravery. I was proud of him, terrified, but proud. He came back in 1946, changed, older, harder. He'd seen things no young man should see. But he came back. Not all the boys from town did. With the war money coming in, I was finally able to pay off my debts. Took until 1947, but I did it. For the first time since the early 1930s, I actually owned my land free and clear. It felt like exhaling after holding your breath for 15 years. Sarah and I stood in the same field where I'd knelt in the rain back in 1939. It was summer. The wheat was golden and healthy. The sky was blue with fat white clouds. "We made it," I said. "We made it," she agreed. And this time, it was really true. I'm an old man now, 89 years old as I tell you this story. Sarah passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. We had 62 good years together after those terrible Dust Bowl years. The farm is still in the family. James took it over when I retired. His son runs it now, my grandson. 4th generation on this land. They farm it differently than I did. Better. Smarter. They use precision agriculture, GPS-guided tractors, moisture sensors, things I couldn't have imagined in my youth. But they also remember. I made sure of that. I made sure they know the stories of the Dust Bowl, of what happens when you push the land too hard, of what happens when you ignore the warning signs, of what happens when you think you're smarter than nature. Because here's what the Dust Bowl taught me, and what I want to teach you. The land is not infinite. It seems like it is when you're young and strong and the rain is falling and the wheat is growing. But it's not. It's fragile, precious, limited. And if you don't respect it, if you don't care for it, if you just take and take and take, eventually it will stop giving, and when it does, no amount of hard work or stubbornness or prayer will bring it back. Only time, and rain, and very careful stewardship. We got lucky. The rain came back. If it had lasted another few years, if the drought had gone on until 1942 or 1943, there wouldn't be anyone left to tell these stories. People ask me if something like the Dust Bowl could happen again. I used to say no. We learned our lesson. We have better farming practices now, better conservation, better technology. But lately, I'm not so sure. I see the same patterns, the same thinking. Push for more production. Plant every acre. Water coming from aquifers that are dropping lower every year. And the climate is changing. Getting hotter, getting drier. The scientists say we're in for more droughts, more extreme weather, more stress on the land. So, yeah, it could happen again. And if it does, I hope we're smarter this time. I hope we act sooner. I hope we don't wait until the sky turns black and the children are choking on dust before we admit there's a problem. Because I've lived through the alternative, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. You know what strikes me most, looking back on it all? How close we came to losing everything. And I don't just mean my farm or my family. I mean the entire region, the entire agricultural system that feeds this country. If the drought had lasted a few more years, if the New Deal programs hadn't helped keep people alive, if World War II hadn't created demand for wheat again, the Great Plains might have been permanently abandoned, turned into a desert, a dead zone. It almost happened. There are still places out here where you can see the scars. Areas where the topsoil never came back, where nothing grows right, where the land is still trying to heal from what we did to it 90 years ago. My grandson understands this. He farms carefully, sustainably. He leaves buffer strips of native grass. He uses cover crops. He monitors the aquifer levels. He's not just growing wheat. He's stewarding the land for the next generation, for his children and their children. That's what we should have been doing all along. But we didn't know. We thought the land was endless. We thought we could conquer nature through technology and hard work. The Dust Bowl taught us different. It taught us humility, respect, the understanding that we're not separate from nature. We're part of it, and when we damage it, we damage ourselves. Emma, my youngest daughter, became a teacher. She taught Oklahoma history for 40 years before she retired. Every year she'd bring her students to visit me. I'd tell them about the Dust Bowl, show them the old photographs, the ones with the giant dust clouds blotting out the sun, the abandoned farms, the migrants heading west. And every year, without fail, some kid would ask, could it happen again? Yes, I'd tell them. Absolutely yes, if we're not careful, if we forget, if we repeat our mistakes. They'd look scared, which was good. They should be scared. Fear is what makes you careful. Then I'd tell them about the rain in 1939, about the recovery, about how we learned and adapted and survived. We can prevent another Dust Bowl, I'd say, but only if we remember what happened, only if we respect the land, only if we understand that short-term profit isn't worth long-term destruction. Some of them got it. You could see it in their eyes. The understanding that this wasn't just old history. It was a warning, a lesson that was still relevant. Others didn't care. They were just kids, thinking about the weekend, about video games or sports or whatever kids think about these days. But maybe later, when they're older, they'll remember. They'll remember the old farmer who told them about the sky turning black, about choking on dust, about watching everything die, and maybe they'll make better choices than we did. That's all I can hope for. Before I finish this story, I want to tell you about some people. See, when you read about the Dust Bowl in textbooks, you get statistics. 3.5 million people displaced, 2.5 million migrants, millions of acres of farmland destroyed. Numbers. But those numbers were people. Real people with names and faces and dreams. Let me tell you about them. Mrs. Patterson ran the general store in town. She was 62 years old when she died of dust pneumonia in 1935. She had 7 grandchildren she never got to see grow up. Bobby Morrison was 7 years old. He loved playing with toy soldiers. His lungs filled with dust, and he died gasping for air in his mother's arms. Sam Martinez hanged himself in his barn because he couldn't stand to watch his family suffer anymore. He left behind a wife and 4 kids who had to figure out how to survive without him. Tom Henderson, my neighbor, died in a migrant camp in California in 1938. Typhoid. He was 37 years old. His family buried him in a pauper's grave because they couldn't afford to ship his body home. Rachel Chen, who'd come to Oklahoma from China to start a new life, lost her restaurant when nobody had money to eat out anymore. Last I heard, she was in San Francisco, but I don't know if she ever got back on her feet. The Anderson twins, Billy and Bobby, both got dust pneumonia. Billy survived. Bobby didn't. Billy lived with survivor's guilt his entire life, wondering why him and not his brother. These weren't just casualties of a natural disaster. They were casualties of human arrogance, of thinking we could bend nature to our will without consequences. Every single one of them deserved better. And the survivors, we carried the scars forever. Sarah never really stopped coughing. Even decades later, even after we moved into town and left the farm, she'd have these coughing fits. Her lungs were damaged permanently from breathing all that dust. Emma developed anxiety. Any time the wind picked up or clouds gathered, she'd panic. Even as an adult, even living in the city, she couldn't stand storms. James came back from the war and thought he'd left the trauma behind, but the Dust Bowl had marked him just as deeply as combat did. He never talked about it, but I could see it in his eyes when the weather turned dry. Me? I have nightmares. Even now, at 89 years old, I'll dream about that wall of black dust rolling toward me. I'll dream about choking, suffocating, dying in the darkness. I'll wake up gasping, and for a moment I'm back there, back in that hell. Then Sarah would take my hand, this was when she was still alive, and whisper, "You're safe. We're safe. It's over." But it's never really over. Not for those of us who live through it. We carry it with us, in our lungs, in our memories, in the way we look at the sky and pray for rain, in the way we never, ever take water for granted. That's the human cost of the Dust Bowl. Not just the people who died, but the people who survived and had to live with what they'd seen, what they'd lost, what they'd endured. We're dying off now, the last of the Dust Bowl survivors. There aren't many of us left, but our stories need to survive. Our warnings need to be heard. Because if we forget what happened, if we forget the human cost of environmental destruction, we'll do it again. And next time, we might not get lucky. Next time, the rain might not come back. So here we are, the end of my story. You've heard about the golden years when wheat made us rich. You've heard about the drought and the dust, the storms that blacked out the sun, the exodus of desperate refugees, the suffering, the death, the slow, painful recovery. You've heard it all. Now let me tell you the one thing you need to remember from all of this. The land will always win. You can push it, you can plow it, you can plant it, you can irrigate it, you can dump fertilizer on it and spray it with pesticides and squeeze every last bushel of wheat out of it. But if you don't respect it, if you don't care for it, if you take more than you give back, eventually it will stop producing. And when it does, no amount of technology or money or willpower will make it produce again. We learned that the hard way. The Dust Bowl happened because we thought we were smarter than nature. We thought we could turn a semi-arid grassland into an endless wheat factory. We thought rain and soil were infinite resources. We were wrong, and our children paid the price for our arrogance. They choked on dust. They went hungry. They watched their parents lose everything. Some of them died, all because we didn't respect the land. I'm not saying we should go back to primitive agriculture. Technology is good. Modern farming practices feed billions of people. That's important. But technology isn't a substitute for stewardship. Efficiency isn't a substitute for sustainability. You can have both. You can farm productively and responsibly. You can make money and care for the land. But you have to choose to do it. You have to decide that short-term profit isn't worth long-term destruction. And that's hard. It's always hard to sacrifice immediate gain for future sustainability. But the alternative is the Dust Bowl. The alternative is watching the sky turn black, watching your children cough up brown phlegm, watching your fields turn to powder and blow away. The alternative is losing everything. I've seen it. I've lived it. And I'm telling you, as an old man who's lived through one of the worst environmental disasters in American history, it's not worth it. Whatever you think you're gaining by pushing the land too hard, by ignoring the warning signs, by prioritizing short-term profit over long-term sustainability, it's not worth it. Because when the land breaks, everything breaks. The economy breaks, communities break, families break, people break. And putting it all back together takes decades, if you can put it back together at all. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, that's a terrible story, but it was 90 years ago. We're smarter now. We have better technology. It won't happen again. And I hope you're right. But let me tell you what I see when I look around today. I see aquifers dropping at alarming rates. The Ogallala Aquifer, which waters much of the Great Plains, is being drained faster than it can recharge. I see increasing temperatures and changing rainfall patterns. Climate change is making droughts more frequent and more severe. I see industrial agriculture pushing for maximum production, often at the expense of soil health and sustainability. I see the same thinking that led to the Dust Bowl. The idea that we can overcome nature with technology, that we can take without consequences. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. And right now it's rhyming pretty loudly. I'm not saying another Dust Bowl is inevitable. We have better forecasting, better conservation practices, better understanding of soil science and ecology. But we also have more pressure to produce, more demand for food, more financial incentives to cut corners and push limits. So yeah, it could happen again. Different circumstances, different specifics, but the same basic pattern. Push the land too hard, ignore the warning signs, suffer catastrophic consequences. What can you do about it? First, remember. Remember what happened in the 1930s. Remember the human cost. Remember that environmental disasters don't just affect the environment. They affect people. Real people. Children. Families. Second, ask questions. Where does your food come from? How is it grown? Is it sustainable? Are the farmers who grow it being good stewards of the land, or are they just extracting maximum profit? Third, support sustainable agriculture. Buy from farmers who care about soil health. Support policies that encourage conservation. Vote for leaders who understand that environmental protection isn't just about saving trees. It's about protecting our ability to feed ourselves. Fourth, don't take water for granted. Ever. Turn off the tap when you're brushing your teeth. Fix leaky faucets. Don't waste water. Because in much of the world, including much of the American West, water is becoming scarce. And finally, understand that we're all connected to the land. Even if you live in a city and haven't seen a farm in years, your life depends on farmers being able to grow food, which depends on soil and water and a stable climate. When the land suffers, everyone suffers. That's the lesson of the Dust Bowl. That's what I learned in those terrible years. That's what I've spent my life trying to teach others. We are not separate from nature. We are part of it. And we need to act like it. I'm 89 years old. I've lived through the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, World War II, and 90 years of changes that would have been unimaginable to my father's generation. I've seen incredible progress, technology that would have seemed like magic in my youth, medical advances that have added decades to human lifespans, economic growth that has lifted billions out of poverty. But I've also seen us make the same mistakes over and over. We push too hard, we take too much. We ignore the warning signs until it's too late. The Dust Bowl should have taught us to be humble, to respect natural limits, to understand that we can't endlessly extract without giving back. Some of us learned that lesson, but not enough of us. When I die, and it won't be long now, I'll be buried on the farm, on the land I fought so hard to keep, the land that nearly killed me, the land that I loved despite everything, and my gravestone will have a simple message. He respected the land. Finally. Because it took the Dust Bowl to teach me that respect. It took losing almost everything. It took watching people die and suffer and despair. I learned. But the price was too high. I'm telling you this story so maybe, just maybe, you won't have to learn the same way. Maybe you can be smarter than we were. More careful. More respectful. Maybe you can look at the warning signs. The dropping aquifers, the changing climate, the stressed ecosystems, and actually do something before it's too late. Maybe you can avoid another Dust Bowl. Because if you don't, if we repeat our mistakes, if we ignore the lessons of history, your children will pay the price. Just like mine did, just like I did, and they'll curse us for our arrogance and our greed and our refusal to learn. Don't let that happen. Respect the land, care for it, protect it, not just for yourself, not just for profit, but for the next generation, and the generation after that, and all the generations to come. They're depending on you, just like I depended on the rain to come back in 1939. Please don't let them down. All right, we've reached the end. You've spent the last hour or so listening to an old farmer tell you about the worst years of his life, about dust and death and desperation, about mistakes and consequences and hard-won lessons. Now what? You could close this video and forget about it. Move on with your life. File it away as interesting history and never think about it again. Or you could let it change you. You could start asking questions about where your food comes from and how it's grown. You could support farmers who are trying to do it right, who are stewarding the land instead of just exploiting it. You could vote for policies that protect water resources and promote sustainable agriculture. You could use less water, waste less food, make choices that reflect an understanding that we're all connected to the land. You could tell others about the Dust Bowl. Share this story. Make sure the lessons aren't forgotten. Because here's the truth. What happens next is up to you, not the government, not the farmers, not some abstract them who you think should be responsible for these things. You. Every choice you make, every dollar you spend, every vote you cast, it all matters. It all adds up to either respecting the land and protecting our future, or repeating the mistakes of the past. So what's it going to be? Are you going to be part of the solution or part of the problem? I'm an old man. I won't be here much longer. The future belongs to you now. Please, for the love of God and the land and all our children, make better choices than we did. Learn from our mistakes instead of repeating them. Respect the land. Because if you don't, if we have another Dust Bowl, if the sky turns black again and the children choke on dust again, you'll wish you had listened, and it'll be too late. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it changed your perspective even a little bit, hit that like button. Share this video. Leave a comment telling me what you learned. And most importantly, take action. Do something, anything, to make sure we never repeat the mistakes of the Dust Bowl. The land is waiting. What are you going to do about it? Thanks for watching. And remember, the rain always comes back, but only if there's still land left to rain on.